"What the hell are you doing with my children?" Thomas Rivers' shout cut through the air like a whip. He stopped dead in his tracks at the entrance to the nursery, eyes wide with shock. His briefcase slipped from his hand and crashed against the marble floor. Before him stood Angela Morris, the housekeeper hired just 1 week ago. She was mopping the floor, while carrying his 5-month-old twins as if they were her own. Nicholas slept on her back, secured with a worn baby carrier. Gabriel rested against her chest, taking in everything with bright eyes. And for the first time in 5 months, neither one was crying. Angela turned slowly toward him, unhurried, unafraid. Her dark eyes looked at him with a calmness that completely disarmed him. "I'm not hurting them, sir," she said in a soft voice. "I'm just taking care of them." Thomas opened his mouth to roar another command, but the words got stuck in his throat. Because while he shouted, while his voice bounced off the marble walls, the twins didn't get scared. Gabriel extended a tiny hand toward his father, as if recognizing him for the first time. Nicholas opened his eyes slowly, without a single tear. These children who had cried non-stop for 5 endless months. These babies who rejected human contact, who tensed up when the nannies tried to hold them, who had turned his mansion into a hell of desperate screaming. Now they seemed like 2 completely different little beings. If this story has already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. Because what Thomas was about to discover would forever change his understanding of love, loss, and the miracles that sometimes arrive disguised as the humblest person. A housekeeper who kept a secret capable of healing a broken family, and a psychologist who would do anything to destroy that inexplicable connection. After roaring that command and seeing the strange tranquility in Angela's eyes, Thomas had remained paralyzed at the threshold of the nursery. He didn't know if he was furious, confused, or relieved. For the first time in 5 months, his children weren't crying. 3 hours later, he found himself in his study, with an untouched glass of bourbon on the desk and 1,000 questions bombarding his mind. Clara's photograph watched him from the golden frame as if judging his reaction. His wife smiled from the image, hands caressing the 8-month belly that had housed the twins. She had that special glow that only happy pregnant women possess. Her green eyes shined with an excitement that Thomas would never see again. Labor had begun on a rainy Tuesday in February. The twins arrived prematurely, at 36 weeks, fighting for every breath in incubators that looked like space capsules. Clara endured 12 hours of labor, smiling even when the pain overwhelmed her. "They're going to be beautiful, Thomas," she had whispered to him, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. "They're going to fill your heart with love." But her heart stopped before she could meet them. Postpartum hemorrhage. Unforeseen complications. Within minutes, the woman who had been his light for 8 years was fading away while 2 little beings fought to survive in separate rooms. Thomas had never wanted to be a father. Business, corporate mergers, numbers and strategies were his natural language. Babies were unknown territory, especially these babies who arrived marked by tragedy. During the first months, he hired the best nannies in the country. Women with college degrees, intensive care experience, impeccable references. All lasted less than a month. "The children don't sleep, Mr. Rivers," each one explained when resigning. "They cry without stopping. They don't respond to stimuli. They need specialized help." Then came Dr. Margaret Evans, child psychologist, Clara's close friend from college, a 42-year-old woman with platinum hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She had studied at Harvard, had a private practice in Boston's most exclusive district, and spoke with the authority of someone who had never doubted herself. "The babies are experiencing emotional trauma," she diagnosed during her first visit, observing the twins from a clinical distance. "The loss of the maternal figure during the most vulnerable moment of their lives has generated a severe separation anxiety pattern." Her words sounded logical, scientific. Thomas clung to them like a lifeline. "What do you recommend, doctor?" "Strict routine, controlled stimulation, no premature emotional bonds with temporary caregivers. The children need stability, not emotional confusion." Under her supervision, the house became a clinic. Military schedules for feeding, timed naps, educational toys arranged according to child development manuals. Everything perfect in theory. In practice, Nicholas and Gabriel remained two inconsolable little beings who cried until they lost their voices. That's when Angela Morris had knocked on the service door just a week ago, responding to the classified ad that the housekeeper had posted. Seeking domestic help. Cleaning experience required. References essential. She didn't have a college degree. She hadn't worked in mansions. Her references were handwritten letters from neighborhood ladies who confirmed her honesty and dedication. 31 years old, single mother of a teenager, living in a two-bedroom apartment across town. "I don't know anything about rich babies," she had said during the interview, with that brutal honesty he now vividly remembered. "But I know how to clean. I know how to work hard. And I know I need this job." Thomas had hired her out of desperation rather than conviction. She was the fifth cleaning lady in 3 months. The previous ones quit because of the tense atmosphere and those cries that never stopped. During that first week, Angela had supposedly limited herself to her duties, vacuuming Persian rugs, polishing hallway marble, cleaning windows. She worked silently, moving through the house like an efficient shadow. But now, after what he had witnessed that afternoon, Thomas realized he had been blind. The twins had been calmer during those last few days. The crying hadn't disappeared, but it had softened. He had attributed it to Margaret's routine, to new medications, to anything except the presence of a housekeeper who apparently had an inexplicable gift for calming his children. How many times had Angela been near the twins without him realizing? How many times had she touched his babies while he worked in endless meetings? The image he had witnessed that afternoon replayed in his mind like a looping movie. Angela mopping with both babies, carried as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The absolute tranquility on Nicholas and Gabriel's faces. The way they had extended their little hands toward him, without fear, without crying. That night, Thomas made a decision that went against all the protocols established by Margaret. He went up to the twins' room after dinner. Thomas found Angela exactly where he expected, sitting on the floor between the two cribs, legs crossed like a child. In her arms, Nicholas rested completely relaxed, while Gabriel played with his own toes, making little satisfied gurgles. But it wasn't just that which took his breath away. It was the song. Angela sang softly, almost whispering, a melody he recognized immediately. It was the same lullaby that Clara used to hum during pregnancy, those nights when she lay on her side and caressed her swollen belly while talking to the babies. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The words floated in the air like pure magic. The twins weren't just not crying, they were smiling. Nicholas had closed his little eyes, breathing with the tranquility of someone who feels completely safe. Gabriel looked at Angela's face with absolute concentration, as if memorizing every feature. "Mr. Rivers?" Angela's voice startled him. She had noticed his presence without even turning around, as if she had a special instinct for detecting when she was being watched. Thomas cleared his throat, feeling ridiculous for spying in his own house. "I heard silence and thought that something was wrong," she completed, standing slowly to avoid disturbing the babies. "It's normal. You're not used to them being calm." There was something in her tone that wasn't reproach, but wasn't understanding either. It was simply observation, as if it were an evident truth that he still hadn't processed. "How do you do it?" asked Thomas, and his voice sounded more vulnerable than he intended. "The specialized nannies, the psychologists, no one has managed to—" "I don't know," Angela responded with brutal honesty. "I just like being with them." She placed Nicholas in his crib with gentle movements, as if he were a piece of valuable crystal. The baby protested slightly, but when she caressed his forehead with the back of her hand, he calmed immediately. "That's not an answer," Thomas insisted, but without aggression. He genuinely wanted to understand. Angela turned to look at him. Her dark eyes had that serenity he had noticed since the first day, as if she had lived enough to not be amazed by anything. "Do you talk to them?" she asked. "Talk to them? To your children. Do you tell them things? Do you tell them you love them?" The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. Thomas realized that no, he had never really talked to them. He saw them as responsibilities, problems to solve, fragile little beings who depended on him but with whom he didn't know how to connect. "It's just that," he began, but the words got stuck. "They know," Angela said simply. "Babies always know when someone truly loves them or when they're just fulfilling an obligation." It was such a raw truth that it hurt. Thomas felt as if someone had ripped a bandage from his eyes. The following days became a strange dance of mutual observation. Thomas began staying home more, inventing excuses to pass near the twins' room when Angela was working. Officially, she remained just the cleaning lady. In practice, she had become the only person capable of bringing peace to that house. The routine established itself naturally. Angela arrived at 8 in the morning and began her cleaning tasks, but the twins seemed to have an internal clock that detected her presence. When she went up to the second floor, they stopped crying. When she worked near their room, they stayed awake and alert, following the sound of her steps. During lunch hours, while the hired nannies took a break, Angela stayed with the children, not by anyone's instruction, but because they needed her, and she needed them. Thomas discovered her whispering to them, telling them stories about her own daughter, describing the world they would someday know. She spoke to them of birds and flowers, of music and colors, of simple and beautiful things that existed beyond the marble walls of the mansion. "When you're older," she told them while changing their diapers with a skill that professional nannies envied, "you're going to discover that the world is full of wonderful things. You'll see yellow butterflies, you'll hear the sound of rain, you'll taste strawberry ice cream." The twins listened to her as if they understood every word. One afternoon, while Thomas pretended to read emails on his laptop, he heard a conversation that left him frozen. "I don't understand what she sees in those children," one nanny commented to another while preparing bottles in the kitchen. "They're strange, too sensitive, too demanding." "And that cleaning woman doesn't help either," responded the second. "She has them spoiled. What she's doing isn't professional." "They should talk to Mr. Rivers. This isn't right." That night, Thomas went up to the twins' room after dinner. Angela had already left, and the night nannies had taken over. He found Nicholas and Gabriel crying with that desperation he knew so well, stretching their little arms toward the door as if expecting someone to appear to rescue them. He approached the cribs slowly. For the first time in 5 months, he really looked at them, not as problems to solve or responsibilities to assume, but as his children. They were beautiful. They had Clara's eyes, green as jade, and her small, upturned nose, but their mouth, their chin, the shape of their ears, that was his. "Hello," he whispered to them, feeling ridiculous but determined to try. I'm Daddy." Nicholas stopped crying for an instant, as if recognizing something familiar in that voice he had heard roar but never speak with tenderness. "I know I haven't been—" Thomas had to clear his throat to continue. "I haven't been what you needed, but I'm here. And I love you." It was the first time he had spoken those words aloud. Gabriel extended a little hand toward him, and Thomas, after hesitating a moment, brought his index finger close. The tiny fingers closed around his with surprising strength. In that moment, something changed forever in Thomas Rivers's chest. The next day, when Angela arrived, he was waiting for her in the kitchen. "I need to talk to you," he said, and for the first time since he'd known her, his voice didn't sound authoritative. It sounded human. She poured herself a cup of coffee and waited, with that infinite patience that characterized her. "The children," Thomas began, searching for the right words. "You're not their nanny. You're not a psychologist. You don't have degrees or professional experience, but they already chose me, sir," Angela interrupted softly. "And I already chose them." "That's precisely what worries me," Thomas admitted. "I don't understand what's happening here. I don't understand how someone who arrived a week ago can achieve what specialists with years of experience haven't accomplished." Angela looked him in the eyes, and for a moment, Thomas felt she could see directly through him, to the most broken and fearful parts of his soul. "Do you want me to leave?" The question floated in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Thomas realized that no, he definitely didn't want her to leave, but he also didn't know what exactly he wanted. "I want to understand," he said finally. "I want to understand what you have that I don't have." "Nothing you can't learn," she responded with a smile that was pure kindness. "It just takes time, and the desire to love without fear." Dr. Margaret Evans arrived at the Rivers mansion on a Tuesday afternoon with her Italian leather briefcase and that cold smile she used as professional armor. Her heels clicked against the vestibule marble as she headed toward Thomas's study, where she had requested an urgent meeting. "We have a serious problem, Thomas," she announced without preamble, settling into the leather armchair across from the desk. "The staff has informed me about irregular situations with the twins." Thomas looked up from the contracts he was reviewing. For the past week, he had begun working more from home, using renovations in the East Wing as an excuse. In reality, he just wanted to be nearby when the children were calm. "What kind of irregularities?" Margaret opened her briefcase and extracted a notebook. Her movements were precise, calculated, like those of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "The housekeeper—" She consulted her notes. "Angela Morris is exhibiting behaviors that directly interfere with the care protocol we established for the children." "Behaviors?" "Unauthorized physical contact, alteration of feeding schedules, inappropriate sensory stimulation," she enumerated with a clinical voice. "And most concerning, she's generating an emotional dependency bond that can be extremely harmful to Nicholas and Gabriel's psychological development." Thomas set his pen on the desk. During recent days, he had seen his children happier than ever, and now that was becoming a problem. "Doctor, with all due respect, the children are better than ever. They sleep, they smile, they barely cry." "Exactly," Margaret interrupted, leaning forward urgently. "That artificial tranquility isn't healthy. Babies need to express their emotions, including frustration and crying. What that woman is doing is emotionally sedating them." The words sounded logical, backed by years of study and professional experience. But something in Thomas's chest rebelled against them. "Are you suggesting it's bad that my children are calm?" "I'm saying that tranquility must come from the right place," Margaret explained with exaggerated patience. "From secure bonds with qualified authority figures, not from emotional dependence on an untrained housekeeper." Margaret stood and walked to the window overlooking the garden, where Angela could be seen hanging laundry in the service yard. There was something in the way she observed her that made Thomas uncomfortable. "Look, Thomas," she continued, without taking her eyes off the woman. "I know you and Clara wanted the best for these children. Clara confided everything to me during pregnancy. Her fears, her hopes, even her concerns about your ability to connect emotionally with the babies." The blow was accurate and deliberate. Thomas felt as if someone had stabbed him in the chest. "Clara never said—" "Clara loved me like a sister." Margaret turned, and her eyes had a strange gleam. "She told me everything. And she was worried, Thomas. She knew that business had always been your priority, that you had never shown real interest in starting a family." Thomas stood abruptly, blood pulsing in his temples. "That doesn't give you the right to—" "It gives me the right to protect those children." Margaret cut him off with a firm voice. "Clara asked me to take care of them if something happened to her. They are in my hands professionally, and I won't allow an untrained employee to ruin all the work we've done." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with unspoken threats. Margaret returned to her seat and extracted several documents from her briefcase. "I have the official recommendations here," she said, sliding the papers across the desk. "Immediate separation from the disruptive element, implementation of strict routines under professional supervision, and—" she made a dramatic pause. "Complete psychological evaluation of your parental capacity." The words fell like stones in still water. Thomas read them twice before fully understanding what he was seeing. "Are you threatening to take my children away?" "I'm offering professional help," Margaret corrected with a soft tone. "But if you insist on allowing this situation to continue, I'll have to consider other legal options." Thomas looked at the documents. Everything seemed official, backed by medical terminology and institutional seals. He felt like he was navigating unknown waters, without compass or map. That afternoon, after Margaret left, Thomas went up to the twins' room with a knot in his stomach. He found Angela singing to them while folding clean clothes. The children were awake and alert, following each of her movements with that concentrated attention that had become familiar. "Angela," he said from the doorway, and his voice sounded more formal than it had been in recent days. She turned, and something in Thomas's expression immediately let her know that something had changed. "Sir, I need you to keep your distance from the children." The words came out like broken glass. Angela blinked slowly, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Distance? The psychologist says that you're creating dependency, that it's not healthy, that they need to learn to—" He stopped, because the words sounded empty even to him. "Just stay away from them, please." Angela didn't respond immediately. She looked at the twins, who had begun to get restless hearing the tense tone of the conversation. Then she looked at Thomas, and in her eyes was deep sadness, but also understanding. "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. "Or is that what they told you had to want?" The question completely disarmed him. Thomas realized he didn't know the difference. "It's what has to be," he murmured, hating himself for every word. Angela nodded slowly. She approached the cribs one last time, gently caressed Nicholas and Gabriel's foreheads, and left the room without saying another word. The twins began crying before she reached the stairs. The next 3 days were hell. The professional nannies returned to their strict routine, feeding every 3 hours, timed naps, controlled stimulation according to child development manuals. Everything perfect on paper. In reality, Nicholas and Gabriel had returned to the state of constant desperation that had characterized their first months of life. They cried until they lost their voices. They rejected bottles. They tensed when anyone tried to hold them. And Angela worked in silence, cleaning floors that were already immaculate, avoiding the second floor as much as possible. Thomas tried to convince himself it was temporary, that the children would adapt. But the sleepless nights, the constant crying, the tension that once again permeated every corner of the house, everything told him he had made a terrible mistake. Friday morning, while preparing for the office, he heard the nannies talking in the kitchen. "It's impossible to work like this," one was saying. "These children are completely out of control." "And that woman is still here like a constant reminder," added the other. "The children look for her when they cry. It's like they miss her. We should talk to the doctor. This isn't working." Thomas remained motionless in the hallway, processing what he had just heard. His children missed Angela. They were looking for her. They were suffering from her absence. That afternoon, for the first time in years, he canceled all his meetings and stayed home. He went up to the twins' room and found a scene that broke his heart. Nicholas and Gabriel lay in their cribs, exhausted from crying so much. Their little eyes were swollen, their tiny fists closed in frustration. One of the nannies was trying to give them bottles, but they turned their heads away, rejecting all comfort. "Leave me alone with them," Thomas requested. The nanny withdrew, visibly relieved to take a break. Thomas approached the cribs slowly. The twins looked at him with those green eyes identical to Clara's. But there was something more in them now, a sadness that shouldn't exist in such small beings. "I'm sorry," he whispered to them, and his voice broke. "I'm so sorry." He sat on the floor between the two cribs, imitating the position he had seen so many times in Angela. He began talking to them, telling them about his day, about the weather, about anything that occurred to him. But it wasn't enough. He wasn't Angela. He didn't have that inexplicable magic that turned crying into smiles. That night, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. The next day, he asked Angela to stay after work hours. "I've made a mistake," he told her, and they were the most difficult words he had spoken in his life. "The children need you, and I need you too." Angela looked at him with those serene eyes that seemed to guard ancient secrets. "What about the doctor?" "The doctor doesn't live in this house," Thomas responded with a firmness he hadn't felt in days. "She doesn't know my children like you know them. And she's not going to decide who can love them and who cannot." 2 weeks after defying Dr. Evans's orders, Thomas had recovered something he thought lost forever: peace in his own home. The twins were smiling again. Angela had resumed her natural routine with them, and for the first time since Clara's death, the mansion felt like a real home. But the tranquility was deceptive. Margaret had stopped visiting abruptly, claiming scheduling conflicts when Thomas tried to contact her. The professional nannies resigned en masse, citing irreconcilable methodological differences. And although officially nothing had changed, Thomas felt growing tension, as if he were living in the eye of a hurricane that hadn't yet arrived. It was during one of those seemingly quiet afternoons, while organizing Clara's papers that he had been postponing since her death, when fate decided to reveal its cards. Thomas was in the master bedroom, finally emptying the last drawer of his wife's vanity. Jewelry she would never wear again, perfumes that still retained her essence, photographs from trips they had taken together. Each object was a stab of nostalgia. At the back of the drawer, wrapped in a blue silk handkerchief, he found something unexpected: a small brown leather diary and several sealed envelopes. The diary had Clara's name engraved in golden letters, and the envelopes were addressed to different people. One of them left him paralyzed. "For Thomas, only open if something happens to me during delivery." With trembling hands, he broke the seal and extracted several sheets of paper written in Clara's elegant handwriting. The header date hit him like a fist: 2 days before the twins were born. "My love, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong and I couldn't be there to raise our babies with you. I know you're afraid. You've always been afraid of love, of vulnerability, of opening your heart completely. But these children are going to need your entire soul, not just your protection. There are things I never told you because I didn't want to worry you, but now it's important that you know the truth. During the first months of pregnancy, I had complications. Bleeding, miscarriage threats, entire nights in the hospital believing I was going to lose the babies. I was terrified, alone, not knowing who to turn to. You worked so much, so focused on preparing our economic future, that I didn't want to add my fears to your burden. That's when I met Angela. She worked at the hospital, on the night cleaning shift. But she wasn't just any employee. She had a gift, Thomas. An inexplicable capacity to calm people who were suffering. I found her crying in the hospital bathroom after a false alarm, and she simply sat with me. She didn't judge me, didn't give me medical advice I had already heard 1,000 times. She just accompanied me. During the following months, we became friends. She came to visit me on difficult days, brought me herbal teas she prepared herself, told me stories about her own daughter to distract me from fear. And when the babies began to move, Angela would put her hands on my belly, and it was as if they recognized her. They calmed immediately. She told me something I'll never forget. "These children are going to need a lot of love, Mrs. Clara. The kind of love that isn't learned from books." And she was right. I knew in the depths of my heart that there was something special about the connection between Angela and my babies. That's why, Thomas, if something happens to me, find Angela Morris, not as an employee, not as a temporary caregiver. As the second mother these children are going to need. She has something that neither your money nor the best specialists in the world can buy. The ability to love without conditions, to see people's souls beyond their circumstances. I know this will sound strange to you, almost mystical. I know your rational mind will resist. But trust me one last time. Trust what your heart tells you when you see her with our children. And Thomas, be careful with Margaret. I know she's my friend. I know she's going to offer you help. But there's something about her that worries me. During pregnancy, she began acting strangely. She made comments about how difficult it would be for you to raise the children alone, about how she could take care of them if something happened to me. At first, I thought it was genuine concern, but later I began to notice how she looked at my belly, how she talked about our babies instead of your babies. I'm not sure what she's plotting, but I sense her intentions aren't as pure as they seem. Please, don't give our children to her without being completely sure it's right. I love you, Thomas. Love our babies for me. And remember, sometimes angels arrive disguised as ordinary people. Forever yours, Clara P.S. The other envelope contains all of Angela's information. Her address, her phone, all the information you'll need to find her. It's not coincidence that she appeared in your life just when the children needed her most. Thomas read the letter 3 times before his mind could fully process it. His hands trembled as he opened the second envelope and found, indeed, all of Angela's personal information, including photographs of her with Clara in the hospital. In one photo, Clara was in a hospital bed, pale but smiling, while Angela held her hand. In another, Angela had her palms resting on Clara's swollen belly, and both women seemed concentrated on something deep and invisible. At the bottom of the envelope was a final note, written in urgent handwriting. If Margaret tries to separate Angela from the children, fight for her. The babies already chose her before they were born. Trust that connection. Thomas collapsed onto the matrimonial bed, the letter still in his hands, while fragments from recent months began to make sense. Angela's casual appearance in his life, the inexplicable connection between her and the twins, the lullaby she knew without anyone teaching it to her. Everything had been destined, and Margaret, her insistence on separating Angela from the children, her veiled threats, her possessive attitude when talking about the twins. Clara asked me to take care of them, she had said, but Clara had asked for exactly the opposite. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. It was Angela, coming up the stairs after finishing her daily tasks. Thomas stood quickly and stepped into the hallway. "Angela, wait," he called her, with the letter still in his hand. She stopped, turning toward him with that serene expression that had become familiar to him. "Sir? I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Angela nodded, waiting. "Did you know my wife?" Angela's face transformed. The serenity gave way to an expression of deep pain, mixed with something that seemed like relief. "Yes," she responded simply. "I knew her. Why didn't you tell me?" Angela looked at the letter in Thomas's hands, and a sad smile crossed her face. "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and because I wasn't sure if she would have wanted you to know." "Tell me," Thomas pleaded, and his voice was supplicant. "Tell me everything." Angela sat on the top step, as if the conversation was going to be long. Thomas sat across from her, and for the first time since they'd known each other, there was no hierarchy between them, just two people who had loved the same extraordinary woman. "I met Mrs. Clara when she was very scared," Angela began with a soft voice. "The doctors had told her she might lose the babies, and she felt very alone. I worked at the hospital at night, and sometimes people need more than medicine. They need someone to listen to them." "Why didn't she tell me she was scared?" "Because you were scared too, sir. She knew that. You worked so much because that was your way of showing love, making sure she and the babies had everything they needed. But she needed company. Thomas felt a stab of guilt so intense it almost cut off his breathing. During the months I accompanied her, Angela continued, she talked to me a lot about you. About how good you were, how much you loved her, but also about your fears. She was afraid you wouldn't know how to connect with the babies, that work would distance you from them like it had during pregnancy. She was right, Thomas admitted with a hoarse voice. But she also told me something else, Angela leaned forward. She told me you had an enormous heart, but that you had learned to protect it so much that sometimes you forgot to use it. And that these babies were going to teach you to love again. The tears Thomas had been holding back for months finally began rolling down his cheeks. When I learned she had died and that you needed a housekeeper, Angela paused, carefully choosing her words. It wasn't coincidence that I applied for the job. It was a promise I made to her. What kind of promise? That I would take care of her babies until you learned to be the father they needed, and that I wouldn't leave until I was sure you were all going to be okay. Thomas looked at this extraordinary woman who had arrived in his life disguised as a housekeeper, when in reality she was a final gift from the wife he had lost. A guardian angel sent from beyond to heal a broken family. Margaret, he said suddenly, remembering Clara's warnings. She knew about you. She knew Clara wanted you to care for the children. Angela's expression darkened. Dr. Margaret always wanted what Mrs. Clara had. During pregnancy, she came to the hospital and the way she looked at your wife, the way she talked about the babies as if they were hers, gave me chills. Do you think she's going to try something? I think she's already trying, sir, and I think she won't stop until she gets what she wants. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Clara's letter had revealed not only the truth about Angela, but also a threat that had been growing in the shadows since the day the twins were born. The next day, he decided to investigate Margaret's background more deeply. What he discovered filled him with horror, and he understood that the war for his children was just beginning. The private detective Thomas had hired delivered the report on a Friday morning. 25 pages of meticulous investigation that revealed a truth more sinister than he had ever imagined. Margaret Evans wasn't just the manipulative friend Clara had intuited. She was a woman with a history of dangerous obsessions, 3 divorces, 2 professional harassment lawsuits, a failed adoption attempt that had ended in scandal when it was discovered she had falsified psychological documents to disqualify the biological parents, and most chilling, a pattern of rescuing children from families she considered dysfunctional, all backed by her professional authority and a network of contacts in social services who saw her as a savior of at-risk minors. Thomas finished reading the report with trembling hands. Clara had been right. Margaret hadn't come to help. She had come to hunt. That same afternoon, while Angela sang to the twins upstairs, the mansion doorbell rang. Thomas opened the door and found Margaret, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were 2 social services officers and a suited man who identified himself as a legal representative of the state. Thomas, Margaret said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I hope you're prepared to do the right thing for those children. What are you talking about? The legal representative stepped forward, extending an official folder. Mr. Rivers, we've received a report about child neglect and exposure to unqualified caregivers. We have a court order to evaluate the living conditions of minors Nicholas and Gabriel Rivers. Thomas felt as if the ground opened beneath his feet. He opened the folder with trembling hands and read accusations that left him breathless. Emotionally absent father, exposure to domestic staff without background verification, negligence in following established medical protocols, all signed by Dr. Margaret Evans as professional witness. This is ridiculous, he managed to articulate. My children are perfectly cared for. By a housekeeper without credentials, Margaret interrupted. Thomas, I know this is difficult, but you have to think about what's best for Nicholas and Gabriel, not what's most convenient for you. The social services officers had already entered the house and were heading toward the stairs. Thomas followed them, panic growing in his chest like a poisonous tide. They found Angela in the twins' room, reading them a story while they played peacefully in their cribs. The scene was one of absolute peace, of pure and unconditional love. "Ma'am," said one of the officers, "we need you to step away from the area while we evaluate the minors." Angela looked at Thomas with eyes full of understanding. She knew this moment would come. She had been waiting for it. "It's okay," she murmured, caressing Nicholas and Gabriel's cheeks one last time. "Everything's going to be okay." But when she moved away from the cribs, the twins began to cry. Not the normal crying of annoyed babies, but screams of pure anguish, as if they knew something terrible was happening. The officers tried to calm them, but the crying intensified. Margaret approached with a professional smile. "It's normal," she explained. "The children are confused by the dysfunctional bond that's been created. With time and proper care, they'll learn to form healthy attachments." But the twins wouldn't calm down. Their screams filled the mansion, bouncing off the marble walls like a symphony of pain. Thomas couldn't stand it anymore. "Enough!" he roared, and his voice silenced everyone in the room. "Get out of my house, all of you!" The legal representative straightened up. "Mr. Rivers, if you don't cooperate with this evaluation, we'll have to consider temporary removal of the minors until—" "You're not taking my children anywhere." Thomas planted himself between the officers and the cribs, arms extended like a human wall. In that moment, something changed inside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't calculating risks or analyzing consequences. He was just protecting his babies with the primitive ferocity of a father. "Thomas," Margaret said with a condescending voice, "you're reacting emotionally. This isn't what Clara would have wanted." "Don't you dare mention my wife!" Thomas pulled Clara's letter from his pocket and waved it in front of Margaret's face. "I know the truth. I know she warned me about you, and I know exactly what you're trying to do." The color drained from Margaret's face. For the first time since she had arrived, her mask of concerned professional cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Clara knew you wanted to steal my children," Thomas shouted. "And I have the letter that proves it." He began reading aloud, his voice trembling with fury and pain. "Be careful with Margaret. She began acting strangely. She made comments about how difficult it would be for you to raise the children alone, about how she could take care of them if something happened to me." The social services officers looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. The legal representative frowned. "Dr. Evans, do you have any comment on these accusations?" Margaret tried to regain composure, but something feral had appeared in her eyes. "That letter. Clara was under heavy medication during pregnancy. She wasn't in her right mind. I only wanted to protect these children from a father who clearly isn't prepared to—" "Liar!" The voice that cut through the air wasn't Thomas's. It was Angela's, who had appeared in the doorway with her face transformed by a righteous fury no one had seen before. "You harassed Mrs. Clara for months," she declared, advancing toward Margaret with firm steps. "You called her at all hours, showed up at the hospital without notice, told her Mr. Thomas was going to abandon her. I was there. I saw it all." "A housekeeper isn't a credible witness." "But this is." Angela pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket. "Mrs. Clara was so worried about your behavior that she asked me to record our conversations, especially the times when you showed up and said strange things." She pressed the play button, and Clara's voice filled the room, clear and strong from beyond. "Angela, I'm worried about Margaret. Today she came to the hospital again without me calling her, and when I told her Thomas and I had decided on the babies' names, she got very upset. She said that we should choose names that had more meaning." "We? Since when is she part of decisions about my children?" The recording continued, revealing conversation after conversation, where Clara expressed her growing discomfort with Margaret's obsessive behavior. The silence that followed was absolute. The twins had stopped crying, as if their mother's voice had brought peace, even from death. The legal representative closed his folder with a sharp snap. "Doctor, Evans, I'm afraid we're going to need to investigate the circumstances of this report more thoroughly before proceeding. This is ridiculous, Margaret exploded, and all pretense of professionalism disappeared. Those children belong to me. Clara was my best friend. I knew her better than anyone. I should be the one raising them. The words came out like pure poison, finally revealing the truth she had been hiding behind her professional mask. "Ma'am," said one of the officers with a firm voice, "you're going to have to come with us to answer some questions." But Margaret had already completely lost control. "You can't do this. I have rights. Clara promised me—" "Clara didn't promise you anything," Thomas interrupted with a voice cold as steel. "And now I understand why." He took out his phone and dialed a number. When they answered, he said simply, "Detective Morrison, you can proceed with charges for harassment, falsification of official documents, and conspiracy to separate minors from their legal parents." Margaret's face completely fell apart. "No, you can't prove anything." "I have the complete report of your history," Thomas responded. 3 previous families, the same pattern, always using your professional authority to separate children from parents you considered inadequate. The officers took Margaret away while she screamed incoherent threats and accusations. Her last words, before the door closed behind her, were, "Those children will suffer without me. You don't know what you're doing." When everyone finally left, the mansion recovered its silence. Thomas, Angela, and the twins remained alone in the room that had been a battlefield. Nicholas and Gabriel looked at Angela with those enormous green eyes, as if they knew she had saved them. Thomas slowly approached the cribs, took his children in his arms for the first time without fear, and held them against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered to Angela, and those 2 words contained the entire universe of gratitude he felt. "Don't thank me," she responded with a smile. "Thank your wife. She's the one who planned all this from the beginning." That night, while the twins slept peacefully after the storm, Thomas realized he had won more than a legal battle. He had won a family. 3 years later, the Rivers Mansion garden had changed completely. Where before only perfect and empty designs existed, now colorful swings bloomed, a half-built treehouse, and small toys scattered across the lawn as evidence of real life. Thomas found himself sitting on the porch steps, watching a scene that 3 years ago would have seemed impossible to him. In the garden, 2 children with brown hair and green eyes ran after soap bubbles that Angela blew from a small pink wand. Nicholas, now 3.5 years old, had inherited his father's thoughtful character, but with Clara's sweetness. Gabriel, barely 2 minutes younger than his twin brother, was pure concentrated energy, laughing non-stop while trying to catch bubbles that rose toward the clouds. "Look, Daddy!" Nicholas shouted, pointing to a particularly large bubble. "It's giant like a ball!" "I'll catch it!" exclaimed Gabriel, jumping with his little arms extended toward the sky. Thomas smiled, a smile he had learned to use without restrictions during these years of healing. He stood and walked toward his family, because that's exactly what they were now. A family. Angela wore a yellow cotton dress that fluttered in the evening breeze. On her ring finger shone a simple gold band that Thomas had given her exactly 1 year ago, during an intimate ceremony in the same garden where the children now played. It hadn't been a traditional romantic proposal. It had been something much deeper, recognition of a truth that had already existed for a long time. "The children already see you as their mother," he had told her that afternoon, while the twins napped. "I already see you as my wife. We just need to make it official." Angela had cried, but not from sadness. She had cried because finally all the broken pieces of their lives had found a way to fit together perfectly. Now, as he contemplated this extraordinary woman playing with his children, Thomas remembered the words Clara had written in her letter. Sometimes angels arrive disguised as ordinary people. Clara had been right about everything. The investigation into Margaret had revealed a pattern of behavior that extended over more than a decade. 5 previous families had been victims of her manipulations, and in 3 of the cases, she had managed to obtain temporary custody of minors using her professional authority. The children had finally been returned to their families, but not without having suffered traumas that would take years to heal. Margaret was now serving an 8-year sentence for conspiracy, falsification of official documents, and abuse of authority. Her professional license had been permanently revoked, but Thomas no longer thought about her. Margaret belonged to the past, to that dark time when he didn't know how to be a father or how to open his heart without fear. "Daddy, come!" Gabriel shouted to him, running toward him with his little arms extended. Thomas crouched down and lifted his younger son, spinning him in the air until his laughter filled the entire garden. Nicholas didn't take long to join, hanging onto his father's leg and asking for his turn. Okay, Thomas laughed. "One at a time or you're going to knock me down." Angela approached with that serene smile he had learned to love more than any work of art or business achievement. In her arms, she carried little Clara, barely 8 months old, the daughter they had conceived together as the definitive symbol that their love was real and lasting. The baby had Angela's dark eyes, but her biological mother's golden hair, and a smile that seemed to illuminate everything around her. The twins adored her with that pure intensity that only children have, and had already assumed their role as protective older brothers. "It's time for dinner," Angela announced, adjusting the baby on her hip. And then, "Bath time for everyone." "No!" the twins protested in unison. But it was theatrical protest. They knew that after bath time came story time, and that was their favorite part of the day. As they walked toward the house, Thomas took Angela's free hand and squeezed it gently. She looked at him with those eyes that held secrets of unconditional love, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered to her, as he did every night. "For what?" she responded, although she already knew the answer. "For teaching me to be a father, for teaching me to love without fear, for bringing light to this house. You already knew how to do all that," Angela responded with tenderness. "You just needed someone to tell you it was okay to feel it." That night, after dinner at the table that now vibrated with conversations and laughter, after baths full of splashing and games, after the stories that Angela narrated with different voices for each character, Thomas found himself again in the study where he had spent so many lonely nights. But now he wasn't alone. On the desk, next to Clara's photograph that still occupied its place of honor, were new photos. The twins taking their first steps. Angela pregnant, radiant with happiness. Little Clara sleeping between her older brothers. Moments from a life he had learned to value more than any professional achievement. He sat in his chair and opened the last drawer of the desk, where he kept something very special. It was a letter he had begun writing months ago, addressed to Clara, a letter he would never send, but that he needed to write. In the garden, under the moonlight, the flowers that Angela had planted the previous year bloomed in all their splendor. Among them, a small white rose bush that had sprouted by itself without anyone planting it grew strong and beautiful, as if Clara had sent a final signal of approval from somewhere where love never dies. Not all angels have wings. Some arrive with a mop and a heart ready to love what no one else sees. And sometimes, the greatest love we can receive is that which teaches us we deserve to be loved just as we are. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what part moved you most. Have you ever met someone like Angela, someone who appears in your life just when you need them most? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that restore faith in human goodness. Hit like if you believe love always finds a way to triumph, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that miracles exist. See you in the next story, where we'll continue exploring the invisible connections that unite people destined to find each other.